The minister, in return, got promoted, didn't he?
So for me, when I think about all of that, it's very telling that someone can even stand up and call someone else a clever black. What are we looking for? Dumb blacks. Is that the kind of black that you want? That's the kind of black the apartheid South African wanted. Because the apartheid government made it sure that you don't ask. It's yes bus, no bus.
Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham. I'm sure by now you've subscribed to the channel, so we won't have any more of that. In the modern world of social media, sometimes people just get noticed for one very good, I would sort of call it a soundbite, but let's call it a short interview. And somebody who did get noticed by the whole country, I think we all got it on our WhatsApp groups, etc., was a comment made just after President Ramaphosa did his State of the Nation speech, was a couple of comments made by my guest today, Ayanda Allie.
You're one of those political parties that wants to make a difference, want to make it into parliament. Your reaction to this particular speech? See, we got exactly what we expected. Big English, reasonable delivery, eloquence here and there, but it is a very empty, devoid of truth and impotent address. Firstly, I have held this microphone that you're holding now, Slee. I've walked through the corridors of Parliament. I can tell you now for free, the ANC government neither has the desire nor the ability to implement anything that the president has had to say. And they are inhibiting good and well-meaning civil servants from doing the same. Where are the bullet trains? Where are the houses of Alex? Where is the smart city? Where is the uninterrupted power supply? And yet the president has the sheer audacity, the gall, the liver to speak about things like state capture as if they were committed by aliens from outer space. Mr. President, you were the deputy president during state capture. It was you who enabled state capture. It was you who supported it. And even now as we speak, you're aiding and abetting because those who are responsible for state capture were right there with you in that room. And in closing, Slee, he then speaks about Ntswalo. Well, may God have mercy on her soul. She's living in an RDP house that is falling apart because it was built with inferior material so that politicians can get kickbacks. She goes to a hospital with no doctors, even though there are a dime a dozen ministers in the presidency. She goes to a school with dilapidated infrastructure. Her parents don't have jobs. And don't get me started on NAFSIS because it has not even paid her registration. And yet children are going through orientation as we speak. So, Mr. President, we are not measuring South Africa against any developed country or even developing country. We are measuring South Africa against its own potential. We are lacking, we are regressing, and it is not because of anything other than the ANC government. Thank you.
Ayanda, welcome to the State of the Nation.
Mike, it's a huge pleasure. Thank you so much. Yeah. It took you long enough to invite me.
Well, listen, to be fair, you suddenly popped up here popped up there in a Build One South Africa shirt.
Thank you so much.
Now you're a media pro. You've been around. Your name's been there for many years, and you've popped up in a few places. So let's start at the beginning. I certainly became aware of you on the radio and on television, and you had a career with some of the big media brands. Is that right? SABC, 702, ENCA, right? And then you suddenly pitched up, this is according to me, I like, whenever you when it's not you, it's like suddenly, but it was like 4 years later.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Suddenly there you were working for the government. If I'm not mistaken, spokesman for?
Fikile Mbalula, Minister of Transport.
Well, how did that work out?
Interesting. I think that is the word that I would use. Yes. I always say it was a tale of two cities.
Yes.
The best of times, the worst of times for South Africa. Remember, I was spokesperson from 2019 to 2021. Right in between that, we had COVID.
Yes.
We had things like the rail.
Yes. You were watching the rail.
Exactly.
Network being
as it were.
Carried away in front of your eyes.
Absolutely.
And there's the Minister of Transport, I presume, wearing a Gucci tracksuit or something and saying what?
Look, we saw even the pavement on the stations being taken away. I'm not even going to talk to you about the railway tracks themselves or the perway or some of the overhead cables. It was absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
People were looting and vandalizing, and that is because of the absence of your security personnel. It's interesting to see now that the SIU is going to be investigating some of those security contracts, which is something that I just found out about now. It is welcome. I think no amount of intervention that could have been done there was enough to fix the problems that were started before COVID, aggravated by COVID. And I think we're only just now starting to raise our heads and see some light.
But now what I'm sure many South Africans, myself included, are, we still can't wrap our own heads around is that here you are sitting in your office, I presume just next to your minister's office, and his infrastructure that he's responsible for is being carried away. Surely at some point he says something or does something.
Look, there were a number of interventions. There was the war room, if you remember, and that military talk of having gathered in this way, and we're going to fight to fix the railway system, and we're going to do as much as we can. There were appointments after appointments. I can't tell you how many boards were changed even prior to our arrival, by the way. And then you have these boards that are changed, and then you have the acting CEOs, and then there's an administrator, and then afterwards there's another CEO whose tenure was also short-lived. So I do believe that perhaps some of the instability at a governance level, especially executive level, also played a part into this and didn't inspire much confidence, I'd imagine, from the staff. And then again, something else that the SIU is looking into are the ghost workers, where up to 3,000 people were said to be on the payroll, but didn't really exist in reality. And then there was the intervention. And I mean, some would say we needed to get rid of the security guards who were there because the contract in and of itself was flawed. And that's understandable. And indeed, a court did make that pronouncement. But the question then is, what do you replace those missing security personnel with, firstly? And then those who were there before, who know the layer of the land and who know where everything is located, how do you prevent them, who are now unemployed, from coming in and perhaps being those saboteurs? Who knows?
Now, you're sounding a little bit like the spokesman again. What I'm more
default,
yeah, it's a bit of a default thing. But what I'm more curious about, as I'm sure many of the people who have joined us today, is what is the minister saying as the infrastructure that he is in charge of is being carried away in front of our eyes? As I recall, he was saying absolutely nothing. He couldn't not be aware of what was going on.
He was aware of what was going on. Interventions were made. But I think, and here's the problem. So we would issue statement after statement. We would go on the ground physically and look at the dilapidation, look at the vandalism, and pronouncements would be made. But I think here's where the difference was. There is an innate culture among those who are in government or in the state sometimes, where either they don't believe in the words that are made, or they are not going to execute on the words, or perhaps there's another layer that's going on running parallel where tenders are being discussed. I don't know what the reason there is. But for me, I think the fundamental issue that I had with everything that was going on was the lack of what the president loves to throw about, consequence management. So you have a scenario where billions of state assets, right? Billions of rands worth of state assets are being stripped on a daily basis. Sometimes live. I'd get videos from people who are saying, they're in this particular station, they're at this particular area, please do something. So you have all of that and nothing happens. No heads rolled. Nobody faced any sort of punishment to the point of losing their job or perhaps being punished financially or anything like that, which for me was the crux of the thing. And I think where I would then take exception, of course, as a spokesperson, you can try and put measures in place to say, what do we do? How do we communicate? But you don't take the decisions. But I think where I, as an individual first, and not as a spokesperson or not as a sympathizer, but as an individual, and I remember raising this with some of my colleagues, I said, isn't it absurd that billions of rand could just be stolen and nobody faces any consequence. If this was the private sector, say a bank, for example, and I deposit 20 billion rand into a bank, and then Mike, who's on duty, falls asleep on the job or walks away or is in cahoots with his friends, and lo and behold, the 20 billion rand the next morning is gone. Now you better believe that you would face the consequences. There would be an investigation, probably even criminal. You would be liable, maybe even in your personal capacity. There would definitely be harsh consequences that you would face. And for me, the absence of those consequences is what propelled this behavior to continue. So yes, you would go after those petty little criminals, etc., people who steal, but the people who are working for the state, whose job it is to protect the infrastructure, nobody was punished. Nobody faced any crimes. And so the minister would issue statement after statement, we'd have media releases, etc. But where it mattered most was making sure that people get punished and that people face the consequences. I didn't see any of that happen. And that was my own personal gripe that I had.
Now, we understand that in a way, once again, sorry, I'm going to keep on referring you back to when you start sounding like the spokesman, where you say, we don't worry about the petty guys actually carrying the rails away. No, you should worry about the guy.
Absolutely.
You know, why is it only just some mastermind stroking a Persian cat that action needs to be taken against?
I think what I'm saying there is, yes, the petty criminal needs to be punished because they are the ones who are actually on the ground and doing the thieving, even if it's on behalf of somebody else. But for me, most importantly, more than just the criminal that's there, if Ayanda's job is to work for Prasa Cress, which is in charge of the property portfolio of Prasa, that is my jurisdiction. That is my responsibility. And if there is theft to the scale of, 20 billion or what have you, and I don't do anything, I don't face consequences, that for me is the biggest problem, because taxpayers are paying my salary so that I look after their assets for them in this regard. So yes, make sure, and I think the word that we used at the time was economic sabotage. Yes. Make sure that they face the harshest penalties, even the kingpins, but the buck must stop with the government official whose job it is to protect the railway.
But I'm still not hearing one thing from you, and that is, at what point is the minister held responsible?
And precisely, that is even the question that you should ask. And
that's
that
the first question.
That's absolutely, that consequence management must cascade down. The president, as head of state, must be able to say, who did I leave in charge of this particular portfolio? And from there, you ask, what is the minister's role? Are you going after those who need to be punished in terms of looking at the CEO or the board, or those who are in charge of Prasa Cress, the director general? It must cascade down until you find the common denominator that ties all of this together, and you say, this is the individual who is either incompetent, or this is the individual who is aiding and abetting, or who is perhaps responsible for this thievery and this looting. So, and for me, the first question that I would ask if I were to be, the SIU looking at this trail, was to ask who pushed the button to remove the security officials from the ground. That's the first question. And the second one, whose role was it to make sure that there's added security once those officials are not there? I think if you look into that, it will open up a wider network of responsibility. And all of those, if they include including Ayanda, all of those who say, my job was to do this and I was found wanting, then that must be the one question that is answered, and the consequences that follow.
You keep on referencing you referenced earlier the private sector. Well, the first person any big company would come after is the head of that particular department. There was the minister. Now, I've heard you speak about a whole lot of things, but the minister in return got promoted, didn't he?
There's an interesting thing that the president was doing, the ministerial scorecards, right? And I think that's like when you evaluate any employee of yours performance. We used to do them as well in the state to ask, your key deliverables were 1, 2, and 3. You've done really well in number 2, but you're lacking in 1 and 3. And I would always wonder, why are we not seeing what the president scored his ministers? And that just goes over and above transport. I think in general, we need to know, what does the president himself think of the people that he's placed in charge? Does he think they've done a good job? Does he think that they're worthy of a promotion? I'm wary of joining party and state at the moment and saying, moving to Luzithuli House, is it a promotion? Is it not? But for me, it speaks about the culture, right? A lot of people will say, we are, people who are elected in Congress, and people really vote for us and they believe in our leadership, etc. And I think, we need to look very closely at the kind kinds of people that we elect into leadership and the kind of systems and methods that are put in place for electing leadership. And I think it's something that we think about carefully. Are you in a position to say, this is someone who's able to organize, this is someone who's able to put together elections very well, this is someone who could be a good SG, etc., and therefore we tick, tick, tick? Or do you go beyond and say, let's see what his track record was? Do we look at whether or not he's fared well in terms of what the president has to say about his deployment while he was in government? I wonder whether all those things are happening. And that is the reason why we're saying as Build One South Africa, we want the leaders to be elected by people, not by party structures. Okay. We want community members to elect Ayanda, and community members will tell you that Ayanda messed up when she was running a local spaza shop. We want her nowhere near government. Or they will tell you, we think she's not bad at all and we're going to give her a chance. And should she mess up because she's human and she's fallible, we will recall her, because that's what it works. She's not going to be protected by any political party. She's not going to be protected by her comrades in Build One South Africa. If she's found wanting, she must be recalled. So I think that's why it's so important that we look at the way in which we choose leadership, the way in which we elect people, because it speaks to the culture that is prevalent. When we talk about a politician, if I say to you, so-and-so is a politician, there is a mindset that we have. We already have an image of this kind of person, what they're like, what they're not like, whether they're liars or cheaters or sleaze, or whether they're competent, whether they're educated, whether they're fluent. You already have typecast an image of what a politician is. And that is because of the kind of leadership that we've been subjected to. So we're saying as Build One South Africa, we want a different kind of politician. We want leadership that is ethical. We want leadership that's based on merit. We want leadership that's based on a track record. We want leadership that's based on having proven that they're able to serve and able to lead a community. And I think if we get that done, even when you go into a situation like a PRASA, even when you're going to a situation like any state-owned entity, you're able to win the confidence and the trust of people because they know the work that you've done and they know what you stand for and they know that you're not going to be bought and they know that you're not going to be protected or shielded by any structure if you are found wanting in the situation, which is unfortunately not the case many times.
Yeah, because now obviously that is all very easy to say when you're not in power.
Absolutely.
And it's not your mate who should be going to jail. I mean, I'd imagine Fikile Mbalula seems like must be a hoot at a cocktail party, I would imagine. But yeah, his comrades are quite happy to promote him to be in charge of the whole show, which is incredible if you consider that. I mean, can you imagine explaining that to a foreigner? This guy was the most disastrous transport minister ever, and he got promoted to run the party. It's incredible. But hopefully, let's talk about Build One South Africa. You then have had enough of government. You want better accountability. I presume to have got the position of spokesman, you're a member of the ANC. Is that right? Must have been.
So that was actually not the reason. I got chosen because I was identified by an advisor, a political advisor, who said, we think that this person would be able to serve well and that they should join. The first time I walked into that office, I was, introduced to Minister Mbalula as a minister. I think prior to that, he was deputy minister. I can't recall where I interviewed him for a good 5 minutes. And this was years prior to this appointment. And so I literally was just somebody whose CV was drawn up and they said, okay, we like you. And we think you'll get this position. I was headhunted for it and I received it. And I, in fact, received backlash from ANC members who are of the view that I didn't qualify for the job, not because I didn't have the right credentials academically, not because I didn't have the work experience in terms of being in the media, not because I was not somebody who was able to articulate government policies, but merely because I had not done a door-to-door campaign and I had not attended a branch general meeting. And so there was even an anonymous letter from ANC officials who remained anonymous, as I mentioned, who said, we don't think that she is deserving of this position, which was also telling of the culture that I speak of now, where people join a party or a movement, not necessarily because of the change they can bring on the ground, but because of the position that they can receive or the tender they can receive or the wealth that they can amass in that position. And I think that for me left a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth going in, but I was adamant, I'm going to learn the ropes. I'm going to understand how governance works. At that time, I had applied for a master's in public administration. I was going to get the practical experience of how government works, and where I could, I would try and be the change that I want to see within the system. And I think as time goes on, you grow a little bit calloused, I guess, because of the workload. And you think, oh, this is just how government is and this is how things are. And no, we can't change everything, until you have to stop and ask yourself really serious questions to say, are you providing solutions or are you part of the problem?
Yeah.
And when you reach a point where you're like, I really think I'm becoming part of the problem now and I'm enabling, as it were, then you have to make some tough decisions. And as you know, it's a public record, I then decided to resign. Not because I was pushed out, not because I had any personal squabbles with any of the people that I worked with, but on a matter of conscience, on a matter of wanting to go and complete my studies, on a matter of trying to find out what's the best way that I can serve, and also just wanting to, I think, take a step back and reevaluate what is it really that I'm fighting for and what's the best way in which I could fight for it.
And how long ago did you leave?
Sure, I left in 2021.
Okay, so that was before you went to Ukraine, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Was it?
Remember?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that was in 2022.
Yes.
So, okay,
I can't recall.
we've dealt with the past, and I understand that it must be quite a tough job. You're brought in to be spokesperson. You find you are defending the indefensible, etc. And tell me about the journey where that ends and Bosa starts.
I think what government did for me, in a way that broadcasting and maybe even community work couldn't do for me, was it opened up the many layers that are involved in the system of governance, many stakeholders that are involved, having to engage them, having to find solutions, having to work through different agenda of, maybe industries and sectors, etc. Remember, transport was road, it was rail, it was aviation, it was maritime. We were dealing with issues of transformation and the lack thereof in aviation and maritime. We were dealing with taxi violence, something that I wasn't new to, being a child of a taxi owner myself. We were dealing with GFIP, Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project, e-tolls. And so you had all these systems and subsystems that were working, and you had to find the most amicable solution to all these issues. And it really exposed me to the myriad of issues that are involved. If you're saying you want to make a country work, you want to make a sector work, how you're going to have to balance interests and priorities. So when I then leave government and take a step back and decide I want to really study a bit more about how I could really lend a helping hand and the kind of people that I would need around me in order to do this, I go back into the community organization that I had founded, Bukobambi Youth Center, giving back to the community and working with the young people there. I then finish off my first master's, start a second master's degree. I don't know why, but that's a conversation for another day. And then afterwards, I stumble upon this one South Africa as it was back then. It was a group of people. And I remember speaking to Musi about it when he came to visit in Dobsonville, looking at the community project. And he said, Ayanda, I'm working with community leaders who are doing phenomenal work. And I'm sort of ascertaining whether or not there's an appetite for a new party. Right now, we're just looking for change agents who are lifting up their hands and want to be the change they want to see in the community. This is what we're doing. Do you want to work with Nobuntu Hlazo? And I know you've had her as well. Love her. Yes. And she was doing the Women's Commission at the time. And I said, sure, no problem. They go on to form Build One South Africa, now the political party. And I joined them for the Women's Commission. Joined the Women's Commission, group of women who are not politically affiliated, but who have just rolled up their sleeves and are working. I'm heavily attracted to that because it's South Africans who are not looking to get paid or to amass wealth for the work that they do, but they're really giving of their meager resources sometimes selflessly to try and lend a helping hand. And of course, I'm drawn to that. I learn more about the policies, learn more about what they're trying to do in terms of the Build One South Africa part. And then I get approached and, are you interested in assisting us with, maybe some communication advice and tips, etc. I said, yeah, sure, that's harmless. That wasn't going to hurt. At that point, I'm doing events and emceeing and program directing and facilitating debates. I said, this will be just an extension of what I do. I then joined them in that capacity, but I soon realized it's just not enough. It's not enough to stand in the sidelines and point fingers about what's going wrong. It's not enough to, like you're saying, if you're not the incumbent, it's easy for you to throw stones and say, do this, do that. One needs to get in there and get some skin in the game, as it were, and learn along the way what you would do different, how you would do it differently, and test some of these ideas and theories that you have. And then I decide I will join as a candidate and not just someone who's going to be providing communication expertise. And that's where I find myself at the moment. I'm thoroughly enjoying the space that I'm in, surrounded by like-minded individuals who really are playing their part in building One South Africa.
So your current standing in the party, what is your position at Build One South Africa at the moment?
So I head up the communications division, and I've also said I don't just want to receive a salary and go home. I actually want to be on the ground. I want to activate and mobilize communities. I want to serve. I want to get my hands dirty, as it were. I want, as I said, to get some skin in the game. And I raised my hand and I said, may I be a candidate? They said, definitely. Join us as a candidate as well. So I'm a candidate representing Soweto, and we are on the ground every week trying to make sure that we educate South Africans not to become despondent, that change is not only on the horizon, but it's definitely possible if we all join hands and we work.
Okay, so now I want to take a step forward. You're there, you're campaigning, you talk brilliantly, and people would be silly not to sit up and take notice. Okay, so that's all good. The election's upon us. Everybody's almost aware of the date, except for our president, who for some reason just will not announce the date. It's the most frustrating thing ever. Actually, I've got to tell you a funny part about that is that it was all put into context a couple of years ago, and I did a live event with Gwedi Mantashe when he was still the SG at ANC. And there was one particular minister, this was back in the days, early days of the Zuma administration. I think he had a minister of minerals or whatever that was pretty useless. And the whole community wanted her out. And as it goes, that question comes up about 10 times in the live event. And he said to Bruce Whitfield, who was hosting that particular event for us, he said, you guys just don't get it. When you ask us to do something, we won't do it. And, point blank like that. He said it in quite a charming way, which is his way and his gruff charm. But it's exactly right. If you say, when are you going to do something about the railway lines that are being carried away? If you ask that question, it's not going to happen. So that is the way the ANC works.
Or if an opposition political party raises it, even if it's a good point,
yeah.
we will not take it only because it was raised by a different political party. So the interests of South Africans come second, but our political positioning comes first.
Exactly. So, I sometimes think that perhaps the opposition party should say that they think NHI is a brilliant idea,
and then it won't happen.
But
reverse psychology.
The reverse psychology is there. But as we're building up towards this election, many polls out there, lots of movement. Even since Musi and Ubuntu were here with us, we've had the emergence of Mkhonto Wesizwe as a political option, and there's no doubt that the landscape continues to be fluid, right? But you'd imagine that all the surprises are out of the way now. We've got the 1,000 parties that we're always going to have. The pollsters and even the watchers and the people that are interested on, I'll include myself in that group, that know the landscape quite well, have got no idea as to where to put Build One South Africa. That you don't appear in a poll, really. You don't. Neither does Rise. To a very small degree, Action SA is there because of what they did in the government election. And these elections have become almost impossible to predict. The only prediction that one seems to get that seems to be somewhere near reality is that the ANC is going to get, below 50 and perhaps even quite far below 50. Where do you place Build One South Africa in the, post-May of this year?
I think the polls are important, and pollsters ought to be respected because they give us food for thought and they sort of give us an idea of the lay of the land, as it were. But I wouldn't wouldn't place my full confidence in them because history has proven otherwise. So I'm not alarmed when I don't see a speech as much as one would like to see, because I do know that they have been prone to error at times. But I think South Africans are going to be pleasantly surprised. I think what we've been able to do over the last few weeks, and dare I say even months, was to really, dig deep and make sure that our roots go deep, as opposed to just, airy-fairy and being everywhere and leafy and making noise. We know that social media as well. I mean, people love to be on social media, but if social media were the elections, I think we'd have an EFF government because their force on social media was just so formidable over the years. But we know that on the ground, things may be different at times. So we may not feature as much as we would like to see when it comes to the polls, or maybe even on social media. We do see some polls there as well. But we are adamant that we are going to surprise South Africans because of our tentacles on the ground. We've put our feelers out there. We ourselves have put boots to the ground to make sure that we work. And I definitely think that we will feature in the top 5 of the political parties that are represented come the elections, whenever the president decides to announce, although we do hear that his deputy may have let slip a little bit about when the date is. But I definitely believe that we have a strong showing. I am pleasantly surprised all the time when we go on the ground. Remember, I'm new to this. Nobuntu and Musi and the rest of the incredible leaders there have been at this for well over a year and a half. But for myself, having started this year in earnest, when I go to the ground and I interact with people, and when you say Musi Maimane, the smile on people's faces, I think that does definitely give us a certain level of comfort. I mean, we can't rest on our laurels by no stretch of the imagination, but we can derive some sort of comfort that we are on the right track, and that indeed, I do believe, I think underscore that South Africa will be pleasantly surprised by the showing of Build One South Africa in these elections.
Well, if you're going to be in the top 5, that's going to be quite tough because according to Jacob Zuma, the MK party is going to get 2/3 of the vote. That only leaves about 33% between the other.
Well, we know the good old former president has never been good with numbers now, has he been?
True.
So I would not quote him on that. Yeah.
Okay, so and I mentioned it in the interview that I've done with your party before, is that I am aware of the amount of work that has taken place has been nothing short of staggering. Yourselves, Rise, Action SA, never mind the parties that we know. It's so different to, for example, COPE. We're just starting this thing. We don't even have a name yet, and we certainly don't even have a leader, and never mind infrastructure. But, if you compare it with some of those, the first of the parties that weren't of the old, description, Bantu Alamisa, etc., I don't think he's ventured outside of his office other than to go to ANC events. So it's a big, big difference. You guys are creating quite an infrastructure. Where do you see your biggest impact being felt? Where, which set of voters?
Of geography, demographics?
Sort of a bit of everything. Yeah. Because, it's fairly easy to sort of sit with a big pen and say, oh, well, the ANC has got, most of rural South Africa, legacy vote. They put one tap in a village, the whole village votes for them kind of thing. And to say they've probably got 8 million votes that they won't lose, even if, regardless. The DA has got the white vote and to a degree the Indian vote. That seems to be pretty much wrapped up with the Freedom Front mopping up the balance. These are the things that... So I'm saying using that as a thing. In those cases, they link to different groups that they're targeting. Okay, so I want to ask you, where do you see Build One South Africa getting into that market? Yeah. Who are you appealing to?
So by virtue of our name and the principle and what we believe in, we do believe that we are the political party that can house the aspirations, the goals and the dreams of all South Africans, right? So we do cast the net far and wide, as it were. We're of the view that regardless of your race, your age, your religious affiliation, sexual orientation, you can find expression here in Build One South Africa. And we say this because we are tired of having a two-tiered country, as it were, between the haves and the have-nots, and your middle class that's on the verge, actually, of poverty most times. And we really want to say that we can have one South Africa that benefits all those who call her home. And so when we do go out, we go to your rural areas, we go to your townships, we go to your affluent areas, we go to people in different sectors and different backgrounds. But where we have seen a greater response in terms of numbers and following, Gauteng, definitely one of our best performing provinces. Limpopo also definitely coming to the party. We're happy to see the response that we're getting from there. We've got support and members on the ground across the country. But from my own observation over the last few weeks and months, I have been seeing a healthy growth in those two provinces. We're happy to see that your South Africans of all backgrounds, really, and I don't know if maybe it was the video clip that made a lot of people more vocal, because we've had supporters who've been supporting us from the background who don't really come to our rallies. If you look at our rallies, you may say, oh, we're seeing black middle-class South Africans or black South Africans who fall into the lower LSM, because maybe that's what we see in our rallies. But we're starting to see now more vocal on social media, people of all races coming to the fore. And I think it's reflective also in our leadership. I mean, we've got people from across the spectrum who form part of our candidates list. So I don't want to pin it down to say this is the specific demographic that's supporting us, because I would not want to leave any of our loyal and faithful supporters out. But if I could put it down to geography as opposed to demographics, we are seeing quite a healthy growth in Gauteng as well as in Limpopo.
Okay, so, I know that one of certainly when Musi went on his journey, and, I think we were fortunate enough to catch him from early on, so everything he said we've got on tape. But, yeah, I do know that a big part of that was to almost catch the person who's not voting. Right? And that's where I give a little bit of sympathy. I have a bit of sympathy with the pollsters, right? Is that it's hard to poll because you could potentially grab 10 million votes that haven't voted before, right? Or haven't voted in the last elections, and they almost fall outside of the polling sphere. Are you still seeing that? Are you turning a whole lot of people on that have been put on standby?
Look, we're definitely targeting those young up and coming, right? Those young up and mobile South Africans who have just finished school, getting into varsity, looking for a brighter future, to say to them, let's work with you and create the South Africa that you would love to live in. So we're targeting them. We know, we've heard the analysis that young people don't like voting, young people are not going to show up. We've heard that. And with all due respect, we're still going to go out after them to try and get them to vote. But I think more importantly are those who have become apathetic. Your middle-aged South Africans who are saying, we've seen this before, this is not our first rodeo, the ANC is just going to win, so why bother? And I'm of the view that they have gained more strength, and we've given them a lot of hope because of what we've been able to portray, the first of its kind for us to really get leaders from the bottom up, from the people, and working already. I mean, Nobuntu coined the term a government in working and not a government in waiting, that we're not rolling up our sleeves to say, when we're in power, we will. We've already started working now. So I think that has really given people something to believe in and given them the benefit or given us the benefit of the doubt, where they say, we will borrow you our vote, take care of it, and we'll watch very closely. So I do think we're converting those who were apathetic, and we're definitely also knocking on the doors of your young voters. We're not leaving out everybody else, but I think it's important and healthy for our democracy as well that we activate those. Yeah,
because one of the things that I've banged on about, certainly when we started the channel, was I referenced the fact that Donald Trump was really good at wonderful insults, because there was just that grain of truth. It was back early, and now has become a complete and utter pig. But some of his insults, there was just enough truth in it that it could actually knock somebody right at the game. The sort of crocodilery or lying Ted, all these things really hurt those, because there was an element of truth, in all of those insults. But one of the best insults that probably caused the most damage was done right here in South Africa by Jacob Zuma when he sort of referenced clever blacks. And it seemed to put the whole educated black market into reverse gear, and they went invisible for the last 10 years. Are you without it being disparaging, the home for clever blacks?
You know, when that term came out, I thought to myself, this is interesting. Because you have a political party that comprises stalwarts who fought very valiantly, bravely for this cause, who lost friends, who lost loved ones, who lost limbs, who lost sometimes everything, who believed so much in the cause of the Black child that they were willing to put their lives on the line. And what is the South African Black child that they were working towards? I like to believe, if I can be so forward, as to think that they had someone like me in mind, someone who was educated, someone who had opportunities, someone who could assert themselves, someone who was so affirmed by the position that they had in this South Africa that they were not afraid to differ even with them. And I like to think that somewhere in the back of their minds, when they're in that prison cell, or they're in the trenches, or they're starving, or they're, are shooting and sabotaging, or, there's gunfire, that they would have in their mind a mental image of one day the Black child will be like X, Y, and Z. And that Black child is who I am today. The mind boggles then. Why would you want to tear down the very thing that you fought to build up? Why would you then look at this and call it, this is a clever Black? Why? Because they dare question me. Why? Because they have agency. Why? Because they can, assert themselves. Why? Because they're fluent in the language that will open up doors for them and in their home language. Why would you pull that down? I want to answer that by saying it is because the reason for your struggle is no longer the reason why you're in power. Originally, the reason for the struggle was for you to build a better South Africa, for you to build a better South African, for you to build a better Black South African. And the reason you're in power now is no longer that. It is now to amass as much wealth as possible with impunity. It is now to do as you please and build houses to the tunes of millions when people in your area don't even have the infrastructure to travel in and out of their homes. It is for you to have friends who are dubious and crooks and are plunging the country into crisis without any Black person asking you. And if a Black person dares to say, but hang on, Mr. President, what about this? Then they're a clever Black. So for me, when I think about all of that, it's very telling that someone can even stand up and call someone else a clever Black. What are we looking for? Dumb Blacks? Is that the kind of Black that you want? That's the kind of Black the apartheid South African wanted, because the apartheid government made it sure that you don't ask. It's yes bus, no bus. The apartheid government didn't want you to question even your means of instruction for education. They would tell you this is how you're going to learn in this particular language. And if you asked, then you were a clever Black even then. So the fact that in this current dispensation, we're able to call people clever Blacks for being critical and questioning and using the mind that Verwoerd tried to dull with inferior education is very telling of this government of ours that is supposed to take us into the future that we desire. So for me, if you call me a clever Black, or even this party, a party of clever Blacks, because it is comprising people who love education, who are competent, who believe that people who must occupy positions of power should be fit for purpose and should get there based on merit. If you're saying that we're a party of clever Blacks because we're saying you're not going to get into this position because you're friends of so-and-so, or because your uncle has got this surname, but you're going to get here because you can do the job and we will fire you if you can't do the job. If that qualifies us as a party of clever Blacks, we will proudly wear that badge.
Ayanda, that microphone, please don't drop the microphone, but there's nothing else we can say after that. Ayanda Allie, you've shown exactly why people should consider Build One South Africa for the future. It definitely is a party that knows what it wants. It wants a better South Africa, and it's out there doing the work. We've had a few of the people. It's so great to have you on the State of the Nation. Everybody who watched this, I'm sure you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel, Ayanda. We're going to get you back on here. Thank you so much for joining us. And to everybody that watched us today, thank you for that. We'll see you soon on the State of the Nation. Thank you.